Okay, today we will start the requirement analysis and specification. Actually, in past, many projects have suffered because of developers started to implement something without determining whether they were building what the customers exactly want or not. They cannot understand the developers or starting the development work without properly understanding the requirement, and documenting all the requirement actually increases the number of iterative changes in later in the life cycle phases in the different next phase in the next phases, and thereby it is an alarming situation to development to increase the development cost, and obviously it makes an hazard into the development life cycle. So this also sets for the customer dissatisfaction, and that is why the experienced developers take considerable time to understand the exact requirements of customer and to meticulously document those. They know that without a clear understanding of the problem and proper documentation of the same, it is impossible to develop a satisfactory solution. For any type of software development project, availability of a good quality requirements documents has been acknowledged to be a key factor in the successful completion of the project. A good requirement document helps to form a clear understanding of various features or various requirements that are required to develop the software. It is also serves the basic for various activities that is carried out during the life cycle model later phases. The requirement analysis and specification phase starts after the feasibility study and is complete. The project has been found to be finally viable and technically feasible. When it is found that the project is finally viable or technically feasible, then this requirement analysis has been completely done. The requirement analysis and specification phase ends with some requirement specification documents that has been developed and reviewed. The requirement documents we called software requirement document. Software specific requirement specification, SRS, software requirement specification. The goal of the requirements analysis and specification phase is to clearly understand the customer's requirement and to systematically organize the requirements into a document called the software requirement specification document. So this document is a complete set of requirements are written into these documents, and almost never available in anywhere these requirements, and this single documents is not possible to write everything into this single document. The requirement analysis and specification phase starts after the feasibility study stage and complete, and the project has been found by finally viable and technically feasible. The requirement analysis and specification phase ends when the requirement specification document has been developed and reviewed. Requirement analysis and specification activity is usually carried out by a few experienced member of the development team and is normally requires them to spend some time at the customer site. So the system analyst collects the data pertaining to the product to be developed and analyze the collected data to conceptualize what exactly needs to be done. And after understanding the precise user requirements, the analyst analyze the requirements to weed out the inconsistencies, anomalies, and incompleteness, whatever available into that requirement gathering. They proceed to write some software specification documents after removing these inconsistency, anomalies, and incompleteness. The engineers actually gathers the analyze gathers and analyze the customer requirements and then write these requirement specification are known as system analyst. The SRS document is the final outcome of the requirement analysis and specification phase. The complete set of requirements are almost never available in the form of a single document, because in fact it would be unrealistic to expect that the customer produce all the requirements at the first of the before starting the project. So many requirements comes when the project is going on. Is more or less 40% requirements come after the project is into the any other phases after the requirement phase. So the complete requirements are rarely obtained from any single customer representative. A single customer representative cannot give in the whole requirements as the total requirements as a whole to the customer, to the developer. There are requirements having to be gathered by the analyst from several sources and several bit from several employees from several ways also. These gathered requirements need to be analyzed to remove several types of problems that frequently occur in the requirements that have been gathered haphazardly from the different source. So the requirement gathering may sound like a simple task, but however, in practice, it is very difficult to gather the necessary requirements from large number of stakeholders and from information scattered across several pieces of documents. Requirement gathering and analysis and requirement specification, these two are two different steps of requirement gathering and specification. So these two steps, the first step is requirement gathering and then requirement analysis and then requirement specification. So requirement gathering is, we can conceptually divide this requirement gathering into two parts, that is first gather the requirement and then requirement analysis. So requirement gathering first, then analysis second, then the specification. These are the steps of requirement gathering and analysis. The primary objective of requirement gathering task is to collect the requirements from the stakeholders. A stakeholders is a source of the requirements and is usually a person or a group of person who either directly or indirectly are concerned with that software which need to be developed. Gathering requirements turns out to be especially challenging if there is no working model of the software being developed. If there is no working model, then it is a real challenge to gather the requirements. There are several ways of gathering requirements. Starting, suppose a customer wants to automate some activity in his organization that is currently being carried out manually. In this case, a working model of the system, that is a manual system, exists, and the availability of this working model is usually of great help in requirement gathering. For example, if the project involves a lot easier as he can immediately obtain the input and output forms and the details of the operational procedures. In this context, suppose that there is a develop a software to automate the bookkeeping activities. In that case, this type of analysis, input and output forms, and then understand how the output and input procedure produce from the input data, and these are a hectic process. But suppose you like to develop an automating or existing accounting activities of an organization, then the task of the system analyst become a lot of easier as he can immediately obtain the input and output forms and details of the operational procedure very easily. So studying existing documents is one way to gather the requirement, and the analysis usually studies all the availability documents regarding the system to be developed before visiting the customer site. So first he find out all the available document which are available for the organization. Then customers usually provide statement of purpose documents to be developed. Typically, these documents might discuss issues such as the context in which the software is required, the basic purpose, the stakeholders, features, and all the similar software development elsewhere, etc. And then the available documents regarding the system to be developed before visiting the customer sites. And then customer usually provide the statements of purpose and such as the context in which the software is required, the basic purpose, the stakeholders, features, and the similar software developed elsewhere, etc. So first you have to study, first the analyst study whatever the existing hardware are working to, and then he goes to the customer for the interview. And typically there are many different categories of user a software. Each category of user typically require a different set of features from the software. Therefore, it is important to the analyst to first identify the different categories of user and then determine the requirements of each user. For example, the different categories of users of a library automation software could be library member, librarian, and the accountant, etc. The library members would like to use the software to query availability of books and issues and return books. He need not necessarily to know whatever the book's price, etc., etc., etc. The librarian might like to use the software to determine books that are overdue, create member accounts, delete member accounts, etc. The accounts personnel might use the software to invoke the functionalities like financial aspects such as the total fee collected from the member, book procurement procedure, staff salary, expenditure, etc., etc. So from this interview, the analyst gathers the whole information. Then they analyze some task. Task analysis is another part of this gathering requirements. The user usually have a black box view of a software and consider the software as something that provides a set of service. A service supported by a software is also called a task. So we can therefore say that the software performs various tasks of the users. In this context, the analyst tries to identify and understand the different tasks to be performed by the software. For each identified task, the analyst tries to formulate different steps necessary to realize the required functionality in maybe authentication user, it may be issue book service, it may be check the number of books issued to customer and determine if the maximum number of books that this member can borrow has been received or not, check whether the book issues had been reserved post for has been reserved post the book issue details in the members record, post the book issues details in the members record. So these are the tasks. And then they analyze the task scenario analysis. A task can have many scenarios of operation. There was a different scenario of a task may take place when the task is invoked under different situations. Different types of scenarios of a task, the behavior of the software can be different. For example, the possible scenarios for the book issue task of a library automation software may be book is issued successfully to the member and the book issued slip is printed. The book is reserved and hence cannot be issued to the member. The maximum number of books that can be issued to be member in already reached, and no more books can be issued to the member. So the possible scenario for the book issue task are likely this, and each and every task is related to the scenario the previous one said. So for various identified tasks, the possible scenario of execution are identified and details of each scenario is identified constitution with the users. Then we go the requirement analysis. The main purpose of requirement The main purpose of requirement analysis activity is to analyze the gathering requirements to remove all the ambiguities, incompleteness, and inconsistencies from the gathered customer requirements and to obtain the clear understanding of the software to be developed. So after requirement gathering, it is completion. The analyst analyze the gathered requirement to form a clear understanding of the exact customer requirements and to weed out any problems in the gathered requirements. It is natural to expect that the data collected from various stakeholders to contain several contradictions, ambiguities, and incompleteness. Since each stakeholder typically has only a partial and incomplete view of the software. Therefore, it is necessary to identify all the problems in the requirements and resolve them through further discussion with the customer. So, during requirement analysis, the analyst needs to identify and resolve three main types of the problems in the requirements: anomaly, inconsistency, and incompleteness. These three need to be removed from your requirement structure. An anomaly is an ambiguity in a requirement. When a requirement is anomalous, several interpretations of that requirement are possible. Any anomaly in any of the following requirements can lead to the development of an incorrect system. Since an anomalous requirement can be interpreted in the several ways during development. For example, while gathering the requirements of a process control application, the following requirement has expressed by a certain stakeholder. When the temperature becomes high, the heater should be switched off. Here, when the temperature is high, the heater should be switched off. Here, note that the word high, low, good, bad, etc. are not are indicate the ambiguous requirement, because high means what? From a transparent value, if the temperature becomes greater, larger, then it is high. Okay, consider another example, that two requirements that were collected from two different stakeholders, that the furnace should be switched off when temperature, and then the inconsistency comes. The inconsistency means two requirements are said to be inconsistent if one of the requirements contradicts the other. Inconsistency means two requirements are said to be inconsistent if one of the requirements contradicts the other. Suppose the developers contact two customers, two stakeholders of the process of. Then the first stakeholder said that the furnace should be switched off when the temperature of the furnace rises above 500 degrees centigrade. So when the temperature is said here, so the anomaly is gone. Here the temperature is not high, it is 500 degrees centigrade. And another employee said that when the temperature of the furnace rises above 500 degrees centigrade, the water shower should be switched on and the furnace should remain on. So in the second case, when the temperature of the furnace should be 500 degrees centigrade, the water shower should be switched on. And the first employee said that, first customer said that when the temperature is 500 degrees centigrade, greater than the 500 degrees centigrade, the the heater should be switched off. Okay, so there is an inconsistency between these two employees' talk. One is said that switch is on of the cooler, and is said that heater switch should be off. So this type of inconsistency should be removed from your requirement document. And the last one is incompleteness. An incomplete set of requirement is one in which some requirements have been overlooked. The lack of these features would be felt by the customer much later, possibly while using the software. Often, incompleteness is caused by the inability of the customer to visualize the system that is to be developed and to anticipate all the features that would be required. An experienced analyst can detect most of these missing features and suggest them to the customer for his consideration and approval for the incorporation in the requirements. For example, suppose in a chemical plant automation software, one of the requirement is that if the internal temperature of the reactor exceeds 200 degrees centigrade, then an alarm should on must be sounded. So, however, on an examination of all the requirements, it has been found that there is no provision for resetting the alarm bell after the temperature has been brought down in any of the requirements. This is clarify an incompleteness requirement. So it is said that if the reactor temperature exceeds 200 degrees centigrade, then the furnace should be, then the ring bell should be ringing. But it is not said that if the temperature comes down after 200 degrees centigrade, so the bell should be stopped. So bell is continuously ringing. So this type of information is called incompleteness. So this type of incompleteness should be removed from the requirement specification. Software requirement specification. The software requirement specification document usually contain all the user requirements in a structured though an informal form. Usually a large number of different people needs the software document for very different purpose. A well-formatted SRS document finds a variety of uses other than the primary intended uses as a basic for starting the software development work. So a large number of different people needs the SRS document for very different purpose. What are those peoples? The users, customers, and marketing personnel. These are the stakeholders and need to refer to the SRS document to ensure that the system as described in the document will meet their needs. Remember that the customer may not be the use of the software, but may be someone employed or designated by the user. For generic product, the marketing personnel need to understand the requirements that they can explain to the customers. So the users are very much important to collection the to read the SRS document and to find out if there are any mistakes into the requirements or not. If any functionalities are not to be implied here. The software developers. The software developers are also use this SRS document. This SRS document makes sure them that they are developing the exactly what is required by the customer or not. They uses this by sure that what they are going to develop is correctly or not. Test engineers. The test engineer uses this SRS document, understand the functionalities, and based on this write the test cases to validate the working. So without this SRS document, they cannot understand what is the requirement of the user was, what is the input and what was the output. So if we do not know what is the input, what should be the output, then he can easily cannot prepare the test cases. They need this required functionality should be clear to them. The required functionality should be clear to the test engineers, and the input output data should be identified precisely. So the next one is user documentation writer. The user documentation writers need to read this SRS document to ensure that they understand the features of the product well enough to be able to write the user's manual. Actually, the user document writers are uses this SRS document to prepare the user manual. In case otherwise, they cannot understand what should be the input and what will be the output, how to prepare this user manual. Also, the project manager uses this SRS document to ensure that they can estimate the cost of the project easily by referring to the SRS document, and it contains the information required to plan the project. And they can also plan the project, how much day the project, what it should be the schedule time, but time division to complete the project, or phase wise, what is the time, what should be the necessary time to requirement the coding, what should be the necessary time to designing or testing, etc., etc. And the last not but the least, the maintenance engineers. The SRS document helps the maintenance engineer to understand the functionalities supported by the system. A clear knowledge of the functionalities can help them to understand the design and code. So in case of maintenance design, do not understand the whole project, then how they will maintain it. Also, a proper understanding of the functionality supports enable them to determine the specification modification of the system's functionality should need to be specific purpose. So here are some good characteristic of SRS, good SRS document. The SRS document should be describe the system to be developed as a black box system. SRS is a one type of black box system and should specify only the external visible behavior of the system. For this reason, the SRS document is also called a black box specification of the software. SRS is a black box specification of a software, and in the SRS, what is the input, what is the output, these are only written. Whatever the processing is not written into the SRS document. So these are the characteristics of an SRS document. It should be concise. The SRS document should be concise, and at the same time it should be unambiguous, consistent, and complete. Obviously, the ambiguity, inconsistency, and incompleteness should be removed from this SRS document. The implementation independent. The SRS should be free of design and implementation designs unless those decisions reflect actual requirements. It should only specify when the system should do and refrain from stating how to do this. So these are the implementation independent. The traceable. It should be possible to trace a special requirements to the design elements that implement it, and the vice versa. If the SRS document is not easily traceable, then we cannot find out. That means index by index or content it should be present into this SRS document. Otherwise, you cannot easily find the specific requirements where in which page it is written. Similarly, it should be possible to trace a requirement to the code segment that implement it and the test cases that test these requirements and vice versa. It should be modifiable. Obviously, the customer requirement changes during the software development due to variety of reasons. And therefore, in practice, this SRS document undergoes several revisions during software development. This document should be identification of to respond to undesired events. The SRS document should discuss the system responses to various undesired events and exceptional conditions that may arise into the software. So the undesirable things, if it is, and in that time, what should be the response of the system? In that case, also that means suppose you are finding a website, and if the website is not present into the DNS server, then it returns you the 402 error or something different errors. So this type of system responses should be present into this SRS document, and this SRS document should be verifiable. All requirements of the system as documented in the SRS document should be verifiable. All requirements of the system as documented in the SRS document should be verifiable. Obviously, if you cannot verify the documents, then how you will verify your project, how you will verify your task, code, etc. So these are the categories of SRS. An SRS document should clearly document the following aspects of the software: all the functional requirements, non-functional requirements, and goals of implementation. These three main things should be written into the SRS document. Now we will find out that the non-functional requirements are also divided into these three categories: design and implementation constraint, external interface constraint, and non-functional requirements. The first one is functional requirements. It captures the functionalities required by the user from the system. So the functionalities are normally considered similar at mathematical function. If I tends to O means that a function transforms an elements I, capitalize a set of small I in the input domain I to a value OI in the output domain capital O. So I capitalize the input domain and capital O is the output domain. For each small I to I gives the output of small o to I. So this is the mathematical function if, and you have to give all those functionalities are in this. All those functional requirements are in this form. And non-functional, for example, suppose I am giving you 2, 3, and 5. These are the inputs. These are from the input domain. And addition plus, this is also the input domain, and it gives you the output, what is the actual result. So these are the functional requirements. And non-functional requirements, the non-functional requirements are non-negotiable obligations that must be supported by the software. Supported by the software. Those non-negotiable obligations are called non-functional requirements. Non-functional requirements capture those requirements of the customer that cannot be expressed as function, that is, accepting input data and producing output data. The non-functional requirements capture those requirements of the customer that cannot be expressed as functions. That means there is no perfect input, there is no perfect output. In that cases, the requirements are called non-functional requirements. For example, suppose I am saying you that my website can handle at least 50,000 users at a time. So this is the non-functional requirement. At least a huge number of crowd can access my system at a time. So this is the we did not calculate the huge number of crowd. So this is the non-functional requirements. Suppose I am saying you that the interfaces should be easy for the users. So how you will understand that it is easy? Easy to you and easy to me are some different tasks. The system should be maintained easily. This is also, you cannot identify some input output function. It should be portable, it should be usability, the maximum number of concurrent users, the timing and throughput. So all these are non-functional requirements. And if we say that per second, this type of task should be done through our system, in that case this is also a non-functional requirements. So I think you clearly understand the functional difference between functional and non-functional requirements. Functional requirements are if there is a functionality where there are some inputs and there are some outputs. For example, in a book requisition system, if we give some name of the book, it will show you either book is available or book is not available. So these are the functional requirements. And these are the non-functional requirements. If we say that the user interface should be very easy for the users, then the easiness cannot be measured in any tools. Design and implementation constraint. In case of design and implementation constraint are the important category of non-functional requirements. It describes an items or issues that will limit the options available to the developers. For example, corporate or regulatory policies that needs to be honored. Hardware limitations are in the design issues. Interfaces with other applications are issues of the design and implementation constraint. Specific technologies, tools, and databases to be used. Suppose I am saying that you please prepare a PDF file which you can open only in WPS PDF. You cannot open in any other Acrobat or any other PDF tools cannot be used. So these are the design and implementation constraint, and these are the non-functionalities, non-functional requirements. And the security consideration, design convention of programming standards to be followed. So these are the non-functional requirements and related to design and implementation constraint. The external interface required. Examples of external interface are hardware, software, communication interface, user interface, report formats, etc. To specify the user interface, each interface between the software and the user must be described. The description may include sample screen image, any GUI standards or style guides that are not to be followed, screen layout constraint. Suppose I am saying that this screen should be divided into these two, and we can open multiple screen in a single window. In that case, these are the design constraints. Standard buttons and functions that will appear on every screen. If we say that help button should be available in each and every screen, so this is something different design issue. Okay, keyboard shortcuts, error message, display standards, and so on. So these are the external interface that are required. Also, suppose I am saying if we develop if we like to automate a system, and in that case there are several there are several parts of the whole project. In some parts there are a labor types employees are working. In that case, that labor cannot handle your computer. So for that purpose, you may assign some hardware switch like red, green, blue, etc. for their working purpose. So these are the external interface. So those interface are changed on basis of the user knowledge. So these are called external interface. And this is also another is the non-functional requirements. This section contains the description of non-functional requirements that are neither design constraint nor external interface requirements. An important example performance such as the number of transactions completed per unit time. So these are the non-functional requirements. These are not the external, these are not the design issues. Beside performance, the requirements, other non-functional requirements to be described in this section and may include reliability issues, accuracy of the result, and the security issue. So if we say that security are to be step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, then you can ask that our database should be in step 3 security stage. Database should be step 4, stage 4 security stage. So these are the other non-functional requirements. Goals of implementation. It offers some general suggestions regarding to the software development. These are not binding in the developers, and they may take these suggestions into account if possible. For example, the developers may use this suggestion while choosing among different design solutions. So whatever I told you that for a labor class employee, you can use this type of switch or this type of switch, which are helpful for this development strategy, because you cannot put another employment in case of that employees. If you changes the switch, that employees are still remains and work perfectly into your automation system. So these were the goals of implementation, and these categories should required into the SRS. So then functional, non-functional, and the goal of the implementation are to be stored into the these are the categories available into the SRS.